This is the final session of the last couple of days that you've attended. I think most of you have been at most of the sessions, but I see some new faces, which is great. This afternoon, Professor David Adams, who's Professor of Property and Urban Studies at Glasgow University, David has particular interest, I guess, in the sort of enabling of transformation and the enabling of good public space. It's a very complex field, numerous actors involved. How do you actually orchestrate, legislate, regulate a process whereby we can get better quality places? So by the government through Architectural Design Scotland is going to give us some insights today, I think, into that idea of transformation, which I think for Dundee, who is dining out on transformation at the moment and dining out on transformation as both a university and a city, there are some very valid lessons to learn. I know we have students here who are working very closely with the city, looking at how to transform the central waterfront of Dundee. So lessons learned today might be of some applicability to it. So very proud of you. I'll hand over to David. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Graham. Good afternoon, everyone. It's a great pleasure to be here in Dundee with the University I know well. Here, my name. So, welcome to you all. I understand that for some of you this is the start of a program, but the end of a two-day session. So, I think my task is to do my very best to keep you awake and alive, prompt and provoke you this afternoon. Talking under the title of strategic urban transformation, that will become, I think, apparent before not too long. But just briefly, to structure what I have to say, I'm going to be talking really about what I mean, what I include in this concept of strategic urban transformation and what we might call the place production process. And that place production process, I'm going to argue, has three elements. It's about promotion, it's about preparation, and it's about implementation. So I'm going to take you through what I mean in each case. And I'm going then, towards the end of what I have to say, to refer to some very interesting recent reports in Scotland that have the potential to transform thinking on how we do these kind of things in Scotland, and encourage us, I guess, to watch the political space over the next 12 to 15 months and see what happens. So, I guess what I want to ask is, how do we avoid default urbanism? That, I think, encapsulates what I call default urbanism. I could ask you to guess where that was, but you wouldn't know. It could be anywhere in Scotland. Indeed, it could be anywhere in England, actually. I could ask you who builds it, and you wouldn't know, because it could be one of 30, 40 different companies. And that's sort of the kind of environment that gets built far too often simply because people haven't really tried to do it better. But actually, it's not too difficult. I want to argue that it is not too difficult to do a bit better. It simply needs someone actually to get hold of the process and sort things out. It needs what I'm going to suggest is a place promoter. And that is a scheme in England called Newhall, to which I will refer later on, but it's one of a number of innovative schemes that demonstrate to us that we shouldn't put up any longer with what I call default urbanism. We should get our act together and we should try as best we can to do something better. So what is strategic urban transformation? I'm talking about really big developments or big places. I'm talking about the kind of places where it's not just up to one person or one company, that you have to get different actors, different organizations, different companies, different people to work together. So you could have major expansions, you might have major regeneration schemes, comprehensive city centre improvements. It's about, in some cases, building something entirely from scratch. It might be within a city, and we see that, for example, at King's Cross in London. might be on the periphery of the city, in expansion. It's about taking the kind of places that have fallen into decline, in some cases into despair, and rescuing them. And what we have is what I call process and place production process. And if we can understand, if we can begin to understand the process by which the very best of these places come together, we can identify lessons to apply elsewhere. So, what I want to do, as I say, is almost to take apart what I mean by the place production process, see how it works, and see how we might apply it. And the essence of it is that we move from the kind of organisation that is encapsulated by that top diagram to the kind of organisation that's encapsulated by the bottom diagram. And what we're trying to do by organising, by coordinating, by integrating, crucially, is to produce and capture added value. And one of the things that constantly strikes me as untrue is when people say we can't afford, there's no money in making decent places. There's actually money to be made, there's more money to be made if you do it well. Because all the transaction costs of people working separately are removed, and there is added value of producing something that works well as an entity, in contrast to all small little bits that don't work very well. So, what the place production process is trying to do is to generate or capture added value. It's not dependent in long term on subsidy. There might need to be some public investment up front, but in the long term, the argument is that well-planned and integrated development is actually worth more. And it's worth more to those who will invest in it. In other words, when we're talking about sustainable development, we can make sustainable development financially attractive. It may require higher initial investment, as I say, but that produces the basis for higher long-term investment returns. So, as well as creating a place, transforming a city, transforming a town, building an extension, we're not simply creating a place, we have to think that we are creating real estate markets that work. Because if we can create something that is marketable, a place where people want to live, to work, to invest, we're creating some real value. So to me, strategic urban transformation is partly about the place, but it's partly about the market. And you put those two together, and that's what creates the added value. And what this does is solve what we call collective action problems. And collective action problems are about free riding. We all know about free riding. We know that we're all happy for someone else to pay and us to get the benefit, whatever it happens to be. Free riding in all sorts of ways, but in urban development, free riding is one of the worst problems we come across. Someone puts in the investment for the urban infrastructure, for the landscape, everyone else benefits, but no one contributes apart from the person who put in the investment. What does that mean? It is a discouragement. It discourages people putting their money up front unless there are some institutional arrangements by which the cost of this can be shared. And that's the collective action problem. That is what we've got to solve. We have got to work in a way that the cost is shared collectively. People don't free ride. So the question is, what kind of arrangement can we have that avoids free riding, that avoids people getting a benefit without contributing to the cost? How do we get people who are going to benefit from more efficient spatial arrangements, better urban design, more effective layouts? How do we get those people to pay for the cost of it in the first place? Because if you can do that, you've cracked the problem. Now, what I'm going to say is substantiated in more detail in a book called Shaping Places that I've written, co-authored. It tells you everything you ever wanted to know about urban planning, design, and development. So, a mere snippet of 29.99. And what I'm going to say is to come primarily from chapter 11 of that book, so you can follow it up in more detail. And you have to pay a toll for this one. It draws on a very detailed research report produced by the Scottish Government some years ago, which you can download for free from the web. So most of the case studies I'm going to talk about are both in the report and substantiated. Now, there's a diagram there, or what we might call a model, that I'm going to show in more detail on the next slide. And what's a diagram? What's a model? It is a reduction, a representation perhaps of reality, just to distill it to the essentials. Because if you think about how cities work and how you develop cities, there's so many different things that it's hugely complex. What we need to do in order to both to learn about it and to apply it is to reduce that complexity. And if we can reduce the complexity to a diagram, that helps us organize our thinking in a more rational, logical way. So the diagram is simply that. It's an aid to helping us think about delivering strategic urban transformation. And do we have a light on this thing? Yeah. At the top. Yeah. Oh. Up. The sound, can you attempting to try and understand how we get cities transformed, I'm going to suggest to you there's three main elements of that. And the first part is about promotion. It's about building a broad coalition of support behind creating the kind of place that we want to create. I'm going to take you through that. The second bit I'm going to talk about is about preparation. Preparation to make things happen. All the efforts, all the work, all the project management has to be done before you actually get anything seen that someone in the street would actually see change happening. A lot of work goes before anyone in the street notices it happening. And then we're going to go through to, implementation, about careful management of the process by private placement. And that is the diagram, and that's indeed that book. Most of what I'm going to say is to explain that diagram, what's in it, because it's there for us to organize our thoughts and then for us to try and apply those to different projects. And those of you who may be doing a dissertation later in the year might try, for example, to see how well that way of thinking applies to particular schemes that research. So that is it, and I'm going to take each individual bit, and we're going to start right at the top. So the starting point of any strategic transformation, the starting point is very clear. It sort of asks rhetorically, well, surely we can do better than a lot of the mess we see round about us. Surely with our expertise, with our knowledge, with our links with communities, with our awareness of our government work, surely it hasn't got to be like this. Can we not do better? Surely we can get people to work together rather than against each other. We could create some level of equality. And earlier in the book, I talk about different types of quality places. Places that are well designed, permeable, mixed usage, different densities, places that are sustainable, robust, resilient. So I'm not going to go into all that because I'm going to take, just for the purposes of this lecture, that you are covered or are going to cover what we mean by a quality place, what we mean by what we're trying to achieve. So this is not any way to underplay the outcome, because the outcome is very, very important, but I'm not going to repeat what's been said elsewhere. What I'm thinking about is how do we get to the outcome that we want to get to. That's my main concern this afternoon. So we have this concept, this broad concept of somewhere better, and it's indeed very broad. It's often quite fuzzy. It may not be well defined. We've got to progress to a way down that first side of my triangle of how you actually sharpen this up. Now you remember at the top corner of the triangle there was a little box outside which was about the drivers for change. And the drivers for change are economic, political, social, demographic, technological, cultural, and environmental. If we're going to look at a place and wonder how we can make it any better or how we can transform it, we need to understand the external drivers. We don't start in a remarkable way with looking at a piece of ground. We think what is happening in the world. What are the reasons why people might want to create intelligent place? Why are they significant? And how, especially, is that going to affect their motivations? So remember that if we had no drivers of change, we would have no change. And identifying which of those drivers is more important than others in particular locations, that helps us understand perhaps what kind of place we might want to create. So that's outside the triangle, but very important is on the triangle. So we started off there with our fuzzy concept, and we're going to get down at the bottom, first side, to a vision. We want to end up of having some kind of place vision at the end of all the initial things we have to do, all the initial elements of what I call strategic motion. Well, what are those initial elements? They're about leadership, they're about anticipating opportunities, they're about a culture of placemaking as opposed to default urbanism. They're about building support. They're about engaging with stakeholders. And they're about making use of the type of professionals who can actually be innovative rather than just repeat what they've always done. And I'm going to take some of those now in more detail. Leadership. Leadership is absolutely crucial to any serious urban transformation. Someone has to lead it. And we need to know who is leading it, because leadership is about pushing the project along, it's about giving people confidence, investment terms, it's about containing the risk. And it's about broadening the number and type of people involved. And the words that I used in relation to that is the word place promoter. Now, a place promoter can actually take different forms. Sometimes the place promoter may be professional. Sometimes the place promoter may be a politician. Sometimes it may be one individual, sometimes it may be a group of individuals. It varies from scheme to scheme. But the key thing is that there is a highly motivated, highly determined individual, group of individuals working within a context, within an organisation that is backing them up. And Verband in Germany is a good example. It's one of the case studies, both in the report, in the book, and I want to pick Verband out at this stage because of what it tells us about leadership. This is Verband. It's a very good example of what I would call a strategic transformation. This was a former defence operation in Germany, and it became redundant at the end of the Cold War. So what they do about it, they have transformed it into a widely renowned new urban neighbourhood. See, I'm not going to run through, but you can see the elements. It's not just a housing estate. That's the key thing. In many parts of the UK, it would just be a housing estate. We have all the elements in there that makes an integrated place. And what we have is very extensive stakeholder engagement with that case study, and cooperatives, housing cooperatives, is one of the key elements of delivering the new accommodation. Said that, but I wanted to say the key person there, I didn't mention, was Thorpe Dengson, who is the chief planner in that case, who you could identify clearly as the place promoter. Again, following up the report, we've done some subsequent, these are quite bitty pieces. They're about 3 or 4 pages each, but they're about the need for local place leadership within communities, and how you encourage a sense of leadership in a local community. And that again is not a piece of work in association with Architecture and Design Scotland, and we're now following that up with a series of workshops under the title This Place Matters. But we had a very interesting local workshop with in Kirkcaldy, with a whole series of different people, from the local head teacher, the police superintendent, person in charge of social services, the councillors, the planners, everyone else. How do you get a group of people like that to think and act as local leaders and to transform a place like Kirkcaldy? So we're taking that forward over the autumn and next spring, doing 3 more of those type of leadership workshops. We don't need to think that leadership is automatically a public sector responsibility. We don't need to think that it's going to be the council all the time. You can identify different models, and there are a number of those. Again, I'm not going to go and run through them all, but the municipality leading, it's actually in Dundee. That's unusual. In British cities, in many cases. It's not unusual in European cities. In European cities, municipalities are often at the forefront of this kind of community. The UK has often done things differently, but sometimes you can have a landowner or a town founder doing it. And sometimes you can have a collective organisation of private sector interests, which I'll talk about later on. Anticipate opportunities. Well, I mentioned the drivers. Anticipate opportunities is identifying before they happen what are the drivers going to be. Because if you can think through those drivers and be ready for them, you take advantage of what I call windows of development opportunity. Let me explain that concept. I guess you all know about booms and slumps in the economy. We all know the global financial crisis, the crash. Before that, we were doing very well. Hopefully, we're starting to come up again. Well, urban development is just the same. It comes in booms and slumps. And sometimes the key thing about getting some of this work happening is to get the timing right, so that we're ready to start on site when the economy picks up. And if all sorts of things delay us, and we're only ready when the economy is falling into another slump, well, that piece of land is going to be vacant for another 7-8 years. So what I call thinking about the window of development opportunity, thinking about how opportunities open and how they close, is quite an important part of place promotion. In this particular case, which started to Bywater, the opportunity was a political one rather than an economic one. And you might see there, it says Allerton Bywater Millennium Community. It was a commitment by the government, by the Deputy Prime Minister at the time, to create model communities in various parts of the UK. And this example took advantage of that opportunity. And that is Allerton Bywater. This, believe it or not, was a coal field. This was a coal mine. It's hard to think about it now, but that's what it was. It's a much smaller scheme than what I previously referred to. It's promoted by a government organisation called Colliery Science, and it demonstrates, it's a good example of how public sector leadership was able to reduce risk and catalyse interest from developers. The next element I want to talk about is the culture, because there's often a culture in the development industry of second best, of just getting away with what we can, because people are going to buy it anyway. People are so short of homes that we can put up what rubbish we want and it can get sold. What strategic transformation is about is about challenging the culture of the second best. It's about saying that what we need is to create somewhere that is distinctive and works successfully. It's about avoiding default urbanism that I referred to at the start, about challenging those who are simply pursuing vested or sexual interest. It's about confronting often the rules and regulations, whether building regulations, whether they are highway regulations, whatever they happen to be, that are just simply encouraging people to produce the minimum standard. And it's also about placemaking culture is a participative culture. It's getting people involved. It's getting those in positions of authority and responsibility to share, be prepared to be challenged on the vision that they have. And that draws in what we might call the support coalition, because sometimes when these projects are really under fire from critics who say that they're taking too long, or they're going to cost too much, or it would be cheaper just to build a standard housing estate there, build up. If we're trying to transform a city, it's not just ourselves as chief planning development officer and leader of the council, for example. It's about building together a much broader coalition of interests who are going to support that, and when the going gets tough, are going to back it. So, getting support coalitions. This is an example of such a development in England. Another one, which is Upton, on the edge of Northampton. So again, if you look at that type of development is built by a standard speculative house builder, but it's not the standard type house of house type that you see up and down the country. It's different. How can you might think, why do we persuade these people to build that kind of thing in one place when over the rest of the country they churn out what they normally produce? The answer is that we have set up the production process in a way that compels and encourages them to do something much better. It can be done. And in this case, extensive consultation through inquiry by design, what we call this model of charrettes, run by English Partnerships and the Prince's Foundation. Developers, Barratt's, well, we know Barratt's, Miller Homes, we know what they normally produce. That is much, much better. It can be done. And John Prescott, as Deputy Prime Minister, was one of the key drivers, a guy who gets a lot of criticism for all sorts of reasons, but in his time in the job, he was driving forward this agenda, and particularly that development. Stakeholder engagement, we need to get people involved, because people are not simply there to complain. People actually have a lot of knowledge to contribute, a lot of ideas, and getting something different is drawing not just on the knowledge of the professionals, but broader stakeholders as well. But we do need innovative professionals. We need people who are committed, who are value positive, who are interested and engaged. Not every architect, not every planner is able to engage with these kind of schemes, but many are in this. So where we've got to at that point, hopefully, is we've done our preparation. We have got to a general vision of what we want to achieve. But a vision is not a product. A vision is a direction of travel. How do we get from the direction of travel to something that people can actually start building on the ground? And that's about preparation. And within preparation, design is actually quite important. And design is not about sort of glorified architecture, it's about integrated placemaking. It's an activity that is putting people together. I'm going to go through now the various elements that need to be sorted out in order to get from what we might start with, which is sort of a vision, a direction of what we want to achieve. We've put together this whole coalition. We've identified the opportunities. We know in general terms what we want to do. We need to move through from there to a place where there is commitment, where we know we're definitely going ahead. So this is a pretty crucial stage, because so many places you have endless visions, endless sort of architects' drawings of wonderful things, artists' impressions, and they never get built. And what does that do? That puts people off. That causes people to get disengaged. There's a limited number of times you can tell people that we're going to create this vision place, show them these wonderful architects' impressions. Never happens. We need to make sure, the place promoter needs to make sure that we move on from a general vision and we sign people up. We have actually move ahead and achieve things. How are we going to do that? We need a master plan as an essential element. We need to be able to coordinate all the decisions. People know what's going to happen. The place promoter, the person in charge or the group in charge, hasn't got to subcontract this out as so many do. They've got to take responsibility for commissioning and then implementing the master plan. There is a glorious, almost no, let's say a notorious part of London Docklands where I'm told there were 70 different master plans produced. Can you believe it? That is really not simply a waste of money, but it's, imagine what you were living in that area and you had all these master plans being produced of how a derrick area was going to be transferred. Nothing happened. The reason being that in those particular cases, the place promoter never, well, there wasn't a place promoter, but they never really got to grips with commissioning and implementing the master plan. They went through endless consultants, producing endless different master plans. We've got to have a master plan, and I'm not talking about sort of a blueprint, a fixed one that never changes. I'm talking what we call a coded, a flexible master plan that lays down general principles but allows for substantive change, but gives a direction. So we need a master plan, we need to sign up to it, we need to know where we're going. Hammerby, although just Stockholm, another scheme that illustrates that well. Again, this is integrated. These are all the elements of urban life brought together in one place. And what we see there as part and parcel of the master plan is investment in the infrastructure. I'm going to come on and say a bit about the infrastructure later on, but investment in public transport, energy efficiency and waste recovery. What is actually very interesting about Hammerby is this. Not simply is that generally better quality housing than gets built in much of the UK. Okay, it's apartments rather than houses. It actually gets built faster. And one of the problems that we have in the UK, and we know there's a housing shortage, is that homes sort of get built actually so slowly. It's said that if a house builder has a housing estate, they roughly build about one home a week. The development rate of Hammerby was 2 or 3 times that. In other words, when you organise the process well, you not simply get a better quality of development, but you can get the development built faster and people into new homes faster, and overall, more development produced. I want to talk about ownership, because ownership is very crucial, because actually ownership power is much stronger than planning power. We think that planning authorities are quite powerful in this country. Up to a point they are. People have more power than those who actually own the land. And what we must try and do is to capture the land within the strategic urban transformation, because that allows us to ensure efficient provision of the infrastructure, it allows us to get diversity, it allows us to set standards, and some of these things I will talk about later. So part of getting from the vision to the commitment is dealing with the land ownership. And sometimes, diagrammatically, that's what we find. Actually, it's a bit more higgledy-piggledy with that, but we find, particularly in urban areas, a whole series of different ownerships, fragmented. What we need to do initially is to bring them together to consolidate the ownership. But we don't want to build it out like that, or we've got a monolithic, boring development. we started off with perhaps interest and variety. We've had to clear that away to get a blank canvas on which we build. But we need to get back, maybe in a slightly more organised form, but we need to get back to a multicoloured picture. We need to find a way, having consolidated the fragmented ownership, we need to find a way of distributing it. And that is part and parcel of preparing to move from vision to commitment, thinking through how that is going to be done, so that we end up, should we say, a more, what we might call a more authentic city, rather than a boring, monolithic, single type of development. U-Haul I talked about earlier on. Again, a relatively small scheme, but again, different elements in there. And this is an example where actually there is a town founder. It's not a local authority scheme. It's not a scheme run by the council. It's actually the landowners who have been on that piece of land farming it for the best part of 3/4 of a century in the family farm, decided to develop the area, but to develop it in a very different way than would have been the case if it had simply been sold off to a foreign household. They parcel it out. They split it up, as I said, in sort of, you might say, a multi-part. The interesting thing about U-Haul is if you go there, all those various elements have very different designs and actually very different typologies in quite a small area. There is interest, there is variety, there is difference, there is distinctiveness in U-Haul, which there is not in many standard housing estates. And then we need to get through all the regulations, which is a challenge in itself, because we often find that these regulations have to be set up one after the other, and you've done the first one, which is the planning, should we say. You go down and you try and get your road consent for a highways regulation, and that conflicts with planning regulations. One of the things that governments can do in order to facilitate more effective urban transformation is to try and move towards either simultaneous approvals at the same time, multiple approvals, or towards a design code that covers all the various approvals. Because the current system tends to increase the length of the period, and thus increase risk. I left out one slide which I was going to say about the financial of getting the finance in place. Very, very important, getting the funding in place. What we need to bear in mind is that getting the finance of these kind of developments is not actually a funding problem. It might seem strange. It's what I would call an institutional problem. In other words, there are all sorts of different ways in which it is well known you can fund these kind of developments in a way that costs are equally shared up front and the rewards are distributed at the end. The difficulty is that those instruments in some cases are not standard instruments for the money and capital markets. We know that there are ways to do it. It's not that you can't raise the money, it's not that you haven't raised the money in other circumstances. You need a series of institutional arrangements that apportion the risk and reward such that people are prepared to fund the development. So it is, funding is a question of how you apportion the risk and reward. And what you're doing then in order to encouraging funding instruments is to keep a very close eye on how you're actually creating a real estate market. Because if you're going to be creating a successful real estate market, it will be much easier to generate funding for it. So place quality, that is something one can all appreciate as architects, designers, planners, whatever happens to be, but place quality is fundamental to generating demand. People are prepared, if somewhere is going to be better, people are prepared to pay more to live there. There's a lot of research that shows how much more people are prepared to pay for better quality living somewhere. We know that. So we use place quality to generate demand. We have to organise the supply to match the flows of that demand and ensure the price of production is achieved. We need to generate confidence and reduce risk, especially for those who are there and be the first arrival. If you think of someone who's the first to arrive on the housing estate, the fear that they have is they're going to have to wait 3 years until the road's finished, 5 years until the school is in, 4 years until the shop is in. There's actually a lot of risk by being the first arrival on a standard housing estate. We can organise these developments to give much greater confidence to first arrivals than is the case where the development process is disorganised and split up between a whole lot of people. I live in the Netherlands. This is built out of the sea. 20 years ago, that was in the sea. Artificial islands were created, and a whole new community, an integrated community was created. Essentially, the infrastructure was put in first because that was crucial to helping make the real estate market. It's crucial to getting people moving as well, obviously. But we mustn't underestimate the value that good infrastructure creates and the knock-on effect on ensuring things work financially. So that is Iceberg. Again, a fast build-out rate. Again, we can do these things and not simply reduce quality, but produce the product quicker than is often the case in the UK. And the strategic planning context across the Netherlands, which is very interesting, has set a whole series of growth locations about 1990, 1992, and then they actually delivered. They linked, in the Netherlands, they linked strategic planning to implementation in a way that doesn't actually happen that often in the UK. So we've got to a point where either all those 5 elements have been achieved and we're going ahead, the answer is yes, or they are not there and we're going to have to rethink, we're going to go back, and the answer is no. So let's presume the answer is yes, and we are proceeding. In other words, we've got to a point of what I call place commitment. We've got everyone signed up, knowing what the vision is, knowing how those various elements and practicalities can fall into place, and we now get on the ground and do it and produce the quality place that we intended to do right at the start. So we have a number of elements I'm going to talk about. The pre-construction phasing, the development selection, marketing and disposal. And that is Iceberg actually again. So that I said it was created out of the sea. There it is in the early stages of it being created out of the sea. The key thing about phasing is to avoid what one might call a scattergun approach. I'm going to illustrate this in a moment. If we're going to get the maximum efficiency out of infrastructure, we need to connect the the areas that are going to be developed first to the programming by which the infrastructure goes in. Often develop out in a hotspot and manage the pace of release in association with market conditions. So that is contrasting phase development, which happens in a well-organized strategic urban transformation, with sort of a scattergun approach, which we often see, well, we'll have a bit over there, a bit over there. A wonderful example of that is actually Cardiff Bay, where it sort of all happened little bits, not properly coordinated. So you get sort of this kind of thing happening, you just take it through. So this is what happens if we leave things to get on with itself. And this is what happens if we're organising things properly. And no one is going to convince me that that is more efficient or more viable than that. The difference is someone, in that case, is taking charge and organising the transformation. In this case, no one in particular is doing much about it. And that is an example of where we can get value added. We can actually produce more returns to developers' investments by doing things properly than if we just allow everyone to get on with a haphazard kind of thing. I want to talk about developer selection because this comes back to the diagram I was showing you where we amalgamate all the ownerships in one block, and then I said we need to split it up again because if we don't, we get standard uniformity. And the fewer actors involved, the more uniform tends to be the product and actually more boring. And it takes longer to become part of the city. Now, again, that is I. So you don't often see this kind of development in the UK. There's a wonderful, someone's decided they're going to use a beautiful yellow frontage to the house with a big window in the middle. Well, you might think that's not symmetrical, it's not regular. Well, it's actually got something like that created from scratch. It's much more how cities have developed over centuries. So what we need to do is to have some diversity in the block and plot size to get a whole series of different developers involved, from those who will do large schemes to those who might simply want to build their own house. So I thought we'd have some colour to just illustrate this. This is a bit like there was a game my kids had that tended to put those kind of things in a I can't remember what it's called. But it's illustrated. I want to explain this to you. The danger in a large strategic transformation, a big area, is that what we get is one designer and one developer. We get everything the same. Now, if we move forward, we might get one developer who actually splits it up and commissions different designers to do different bits of it. So that's an improvement. Alternatively, we might get different developers who collectively commission a single designer. Again, better than that. But what we really want to try and get in order to get a strategic transformation that has some of the authenticity of what cities are like really, is to get a whole series of different people involved, different developers, different designers, which is this. So we can contrast that again. This first one does all the phases. The next one is each phase is done by a different developer. But they're still big, big parcels. The third one is that we sort of try and split it up into much smaller parcels. And maybe that developer reappears once or twice, that developer reappears, some come in once, some can do. And what we're going to say to them immediately, you're absolutely right, it is more complex and it's high transaction costs. So the management of that process requires quite a lot of skill, because as you progress through to the build out, you can do it in some cases. You would expect to be able to do it much quicker like that. But ironically, the iBurg experience has produced quicker development by doing that sort of thing, or a combination of that and that. It is perfectly possible to set up what we call the procurement arrangements to get a whole series of different people involved. So although it is managed as one strategic transformation, when it's all finished, it looks more like part acts and functions, more as just another part of the city, rather than a monolithic development. Marketing. That is Fairfield Park, which I was talking about entrepreneurial club. This is a club of developers who did more or less exactly the same as some of the public sector net schemes. You might think it looks a bit old. So the whole of that development was built in the style of Victorian housing. So there's a story about that I can tell you, but it doesn't look like a modern development. The key thing about Fairfield Park is that they thought not simply about the individual houses, but they thought about the management, the future management of the common areas. And they set up a collective system whereby at the start there was a community association into which everyone contributed, and the common areas are managed collectively rather than simply just left for the council to clean up, or in many cases for the council to clean up. So there is a management structure in that place that is key to the long-term place quality, and it wasn't a development where just the buildings were important, but the management of the whole area was important. So I want to talk in just the final 5 minutes of how we might take some of these ideas forward. The key idea is this: the idea of a place promoter, of someone who takes responsibility for a strategic urban transformation, knocks heads together, gets everyone working together, a common agenda, and produces the added value to pay for the infrastructure, the high quality public rail, and so on and so forth. So we don't have all these things simply as public subsidies, we have it in place. Now, in the past, we were quite good at that. We had, for example, Newtown Development Corporations. We then had Scottish Development Agency. We had, of course, Crown Street in Glasgow, where someone took responsibility and created something much better than would normally be the case if doing simply that. For the past 20 years, this agenda has been very fallow in Scotland. The idea of place transformation, of thinking that we actually don't have to accept the rubbish we often get, that we can do better. This year there have been 2 major reports that I think are pointing the way forward to a rediscovery in Scotland of these kind of ideas. The first, believe it or not, is something called the Land Reform Review Group. Those of you who know about land reform might think it's all about Highland estates, about shooting and fishing deer and salmon, and the fact that Highland estates in Scotland are a very concentrated form of land ownership. ownership, and there's all kinds of issues of rights of tenants. So there is a very prominent land reform agenda in Scotland that comes out of a lot of rural controversies that go back at least a century and a half. The Land Reform Review Group, in which I was involved, reported in May, and it's the first time when it's been asking questions not just about rural land policy in Scotland, but about urban land policy, of how do we overcome so much vacant and derelict land in that is a large portion of cities. In Glasgow, about 8%, I think, of the whole area of Glasgow is vacant and derelict, has been for 20, 30 years. That is a land problem. It's a land reform problem. And this is a recommendation that is now on the desk of the Scottish ministers, and we will see what happens. And it's a recommendation for a housing land corporation, a sort of place promoter. It would work alongside local authority planners, achieve public interest objectives by taking land into public ownership at a low but fair price, investing in the necessary infrastructure, selling the land to house builders as service sites or plots. And another paragraph that talks about place quality. So the proposition being put in front of the Scottish Government that we need a much more effective place promoter in Scotland. And then interesting, 2 months later, out comes a report from the Royal Institution of Chartered Surveyors, which is called Building a Better Scotland. It is the report on how we solve the housing crisis in Scotland. How do we actually get enough homes built to meet the needs and demands? And for a very long time, a very, very long time, we have not built enough homes, tens of thousands below the number of homes we should be building in Scotland. There's exactly the same problem in England, but I'm not going to talk about England today, but there's interesting ideas coming from England as well. And that recommends a Scottish land delivery agency that is actually quite close to the recommendation of the Land Reform Review Group. It would link the Scottish Government's wider strategies, land supply planning, and the delivery of master plans more directly and efficiently than present. The SDLA, the SLDLA, is needed to achieve more elastic housing supply and ways to build more homes, and a greater ability to recoup the public costs. In other words, deal with what I said is the collective action problems. So this is going to be a very interesting period post-referendum, because the Scottish Government has committed itself to legislate on land reform, on land policy. It's now had 2 reports from 2 different groups of experts, one commissioned by the government and another commissioned by one of the main professional bodies in Scotland, basically saying that we cannot carry on in this country delivering development in the way we have done, and particularly big urban schemes, because one, we don't get enough of them, we don't get enough homes built, and we don't get the right division between the public bearing the costs and the private sharing the costs. So it may well be that we are at a turning point, and some of the experience that I showed you in terms of how you get urban transformations produced in other parts of Europe may well be, we may well see some of that applied to Scotland in the next period. If that is the case, we can look forward, I think, to challenging what I said was the default urbanism, just because no one could ever do it better, and really getting some high quality effective development in Scotland over the next period. So, thank you very much. That's all I want to say. Discussion. I showed that plot lines developed in Iberg, in the middle is the yellow house. How did you react to that?
I know Iberg very well.
Yeah.
I would compare Iberg to Epenburg by Raff and Raff. Epenburg is a much more controlled urban language grammar. It feels more urbane. To me, it's a more memorable urban place. I find Iberg have good intentions. I think the block plan is robust, but I think the variety has overstretched it so much. And I think it's slightly, it's a bit of a mix, actually, as a place. And I think that was quite easy to do. I think what's been difficult is with Raff and Raff is creating a memorable place, actually.
I mean, another example is, you probably know, I think the Liverpool one, shopping centre in Liverpool. I don't know whether everyone is from Liverpool. There is a huge new shopping centre in there that has been produced in a way quite different from, should we say, the galleries in Glasgow, which is a traditional now. So Liverpool one has been produced as a series of different experiences as you go through the streets. It's been designed in a way that is not sort of, well, it has been designed as one, but it's been designed in a way that is subdivided and split up. And crucially, there is rather than being close mountains, an open street going through it. And that, I think, is a contrast from the way in which shopping centres were built, probably for a long period of time. I was going to ask your reactions to, because Liverpool one is quite different from Iberg, but again, it's an attempt to produce something that's not monolithic, it's an attempt to produce something that's nearer to how that city might have functioned. It's not perfect.
Yeah. No, I think that the discussion about continuity and variations are really complex ones, actually. Yes.
I find something interesting that what you defined as default urbanism and the images you used to sort of illustrate that point was you're talking about something monolithic in terms of its aesthetic all being much the same. But ultimately the actual form of it was very much fractured. It's what Graham's referring to about a single street front. You're talking about more of a suburban feel than an urban feel in that it's these sort of individual object buildings. Is it not more of an issue of quality than simply the shape of things or how they look?
It's how they look is the product of what they are. So I've shown you a picture, I have to show a picture. But listen to how they are. We are talking often with sort of large areas of single-use development, whether that's retail, whether that's housing, whether it's to be. We're talking of areas within which there is a dysfunction often between the development, I'd say between the development and the investment. What I mean is the person who spends money on building it is not the same person who's going to spend money on maintaining it in the long term. We often have large areas of single-use developments split up into little pods here, there, and everywhere, not joined up urbanism. So there's a whole series of dimensions. I'll show a photograph illustrate, and the two sort of standards of urban houses I showed is very different from urbanism, from the variety of homes in Newport, for example, high quality homes. Do you want to comment on that because you know the terms?
Yeah. I mean, I'm a complete convert to the methodology that David put forward. In fact, that was the myth that he didn't actually mention, Crown Street was right at the end. I think some of the principles there, multiple developers, the master plan being, I don't know when the previous time think what is interesting is why that didn't roll out. I mean, the big ambition, which was never actually articulated by me anyway, was basically we would try and do this using this approach. And principles David talked about there, I mean, I wouldn't say we were 100% in. And one of the things we failed on was the kind of having the trust, to try and develop trust to manage and act in some kind of stewardship role, even though we had several attempts to try and pull that in. But we failed to roll it out into the south side of Glasgow, and that's largely because I think it's down to this leadership. Leadership changed. One of the problems in trying to make an impact on urban areas is you are talking 20, 25 years, which is a long, long time for individuals and people. I'd already retired from the job there. The guy who was running things in Crown Street, he'd left. The local authority had said, we know how to do this, we're going to continue to roll it out. And they broke just about every canon of the process that David talked about. They eventually gave it to a single developer. If you go down there, I hope you would almost weep to see what's been done. Is anybody involved in that? He said, forget it. You would think, my God, you know, there's a lot of effort gone into this, and it wasn't perfect, there was a lot of mistakes. But at least there were some principles put in place, and the whole quality of that could have been rolled out for the next 10, 15 years on the south side of Glasgow. And it didn't happen, and it was about delivery. And I think one of the comments I would make on David's, well, what are we hoping for the future? I think we know this stuff. It's actually making it happen that's the problem. David's written extensively about it. We all buy into it. We're all into this now, hopefully, or at least the people who are making decisions are into it now. It's a matter of making a start, and I think if we deliberate, and I'd be interested in your point on this, if we deliberate too long, we'll lose the opportunity. My view is that rather than work for a council to perfection, we actually make a start. We run a prototype tomorrow. We just, identify what needs to be done, put a team together, and just have a go. And they will negotiate their way. They will find a way forward for the project. Each place, even in Scotland, small place, will have a different solution in each of those areas. And I think my only caveat about what David has said is that the onus is on delivery. We really, rather than waiting for the government to be in line and local authorities to sign up for it, and everybody, we'll have another housing crisis. We need to respond now. We need to get into the field now. We know what works now, and I think we should go.
Is that you sounding slightly frustrated, and I look on the Scottish Government has been publishing basically documents for years, and you sound like you've been advising them for longer than that, and yet, so all the literature is there, you know, basically, and yet, as far as council is concerned, there's still zoning areas for housing development, and really all they're doing is putting a red block on the development plan, and most of the time, in most parts of Scotland, you don't have the luxury of the scale of development being illustrated, where there's a real critical mass. So you're actually talking about relatively small pockets, and they just get swallowed up by Calais and Barrow, and there's no one in the council within the planning department who isn't related to culture. And I don't know where that funding comes from. I don't know where the policy provision that creates. You can't have a Prince's Trust or a John Prescott for every little parcel that all those parcels to be placed. So
If you look at the total amount of housing that is anticipated as required in Scotland over the next 10 years, it is actually quite a substantial amount. And the issue being that it is really quite difficult to achieve that amount of housing plus a little bit here and a little bit there. So I would argue that actually we need a far more ambitious and a far more radical way of delivering the amount of housing we actually need. The question being, does the government go for the Scottish Land Delivery Agency, or what was called the Housing Land Corporation, or does it go for the fact that we need, this is not a government agency that necessarily does everything. It might in many cases work with local authorities, but it's something to really give a push to this agenda. Because you're right, I mean the only thing that happens at the moment is local authorities identify a block on a piece of land. Well, 2 years beforehand, the house builders had anticipated that and bought up a piece of land. We need to get out of that because it's not just about the quality of places and homes, it's actually about the quantity. I've written a different paper which is called Why Not Build Faster? I think it's a rhetorical question, but it is why does the house building industry churn out homes at such a slow pace? And this agenda is a quality agenda, but it's also a quality agenda of making sure we have enough homes for Scotland. So it's going to be very interesting to see if the government actually picks up these kind of ideas.
But if we wait for them, we're probably going to wait a long time. I mean, I hope you're right. You had a drawing in there of a woman with a thought bubble of
Yes.
surely we can do better than this.
Yes.
Now, who is it that's asking that question? Who is it that's presenting themselves with that as the problem that they have to solve? Because if we're waiting for government to do that, it will take a long time. Because already private builders are already lining up to be asked to brought in to solve the housing problem. They're waiting for that. Now, if they take the lead, it's going to finish at like default urbanism. And somebody, I agree, it's got to be a partnership, it's got to be a collaboration. But somebody on public sector, not government, has got to be having that thought bubble. And I think a good thought bubble, I just wonder who it is these days.
I'm hoping that we hopefully going to become involved and are doing something about that. And I've met one grant for £20,000 across Europe on how we solve this problem with a range of stakeholders, from landowners to the big development, Charles Bruce across in Dunfermline, huge areas of land, to some of the much bigger sites that potentially could be applied for housing. And interestingly, part of that team, I don't know if you know Matthew Benson from Wrexham, he's a sort of specialist in housing procurement, sort of surveyor, and he thinks that we should forget housing numbers. Actually, he says the processes are so tight, to retool and change their product is such a complex thing. Forget it. Go to the new landowners, go to the landowners and actually start to look at procurement models which are much more inventive. And they've got some very interesting ideas about sort of council tract levies for 10 years. We're really rethinking the procurement process to encourage quality to be built in by the builder who normally has no interest in it, but gets something levy back. But also the buyer has to buy into quality. One of the drivers that's coming up soon, the practical thing, are all the new building regulations in relation to energy use, and which the house builders, funnily enough, are really having a problem with. And that's an area we can get in and say, well, actually, change needs to happen. And they're finding that struggle because they keep feeding the machine. So if you likened it to a sort of aluminium plant, just keep feeding the machine. And to make any change, it's quite difficult for them. So a change,
The problem is to jump over all the uniform land and things like housing developers.
yeah,
to get
that's
the
right. And
land.
we have some people on board who are major landowners who want to see some things change. So I'm hoping that we can do some, get a project and get on with it. It's the idea.
I don't know, what do you think to that? I mean, I'm being daft here. I mean, in a sense, it's like, as I was saying in my presentation that we have become obsessed by strategy, in a sense that we don't do anything without having a strategy in place, because that's what sensible people do. But they don't sometimes. I mean, sometimes you have to do things when you don't know what it is that you're doing. And I think you really do. And in this circumstance, it's not as though we're short on knowledge, we're short on information. It's become now, I think, an accepted way of going about trying to create quality development. We need to make a start.
And I think the process we hear was very clear. And, you know,
Yeah, I mean, I think just to respond to what Stuart said, I mean, there was one of my slides showed different types of place promoter, of which a government agency was one. There was a whole series of different, and it went through to a town founder or an entrepreneur club. So in terms of the actual agency, sometimes it's an agency like that, sometimes it's not. But I mean, we have to recognise that this whole area is conditioned by regulation and legislation and policy. And there are certain things that governments can do and can do very well, and we should not shy away from them. There are, for example, issues around, very technical issues around land compensation on compulsory purchase and hope value. Not something I want to get into in great detail. Hope value, yes. So if someone has bought up land in the green belt, does that immediately change its value from agricultural value to residential value, and does that act as does that deter high quality development? All I'm saying is that we should not ignore the fact that I'm not asking the government does everything, and I'm saying that there's a context to be set, and the place promoter list shows that there's other people, but we should not absolve governments of the responsibility to do what they can. And I think that's very important. There's certain things that the Scottish Government can do and should do, and it's to move from a focus that has been this sort of strong policy planning focus to linking it through to implementation.
we in Dundee have a situation, and you missed that discussion this morning, or wasn't there a discussion at the point I was making, is that we have quite a good place promoter in Mount Gallon. We have a municipal...
Grant Street.
Yeah, absolutely. We have a municipal approach because they own all the land in the central waterfront. And we have the good intentions. And where it's actually, and I've been tracking this for the last 3 years with our master's students, where it's starting to sort of become less abstract and more real, that's where the devil's in the detail. The good intentions are very difficult to deliver in terms of urban continuity, for example, where individual developers don't want sites which are part of walls. We don't want to build continuous streets anymore. Although that's part of the city's idea, streets will continue from the city centre and be continuous streets down to the waterfront. Suddenly we get people saying, well actually I don't want to get into a litigious situation with the guy next door, I want 2 metres between my plot and their plot.
And why is that normally? Why do you
Litigation, more litigation. They're terrified of litigation. They don't want to have a construction site building up against another construction site. They want a clear boundary between themselves and the other side. So what looks like a continuous urban block has been promoted as a continuous urban block. It would be 8 separate development blocks, all with building frontages. And that's completely destroying the city.
I'm just wondering, as a suggestion, the developers obviously got some desire to do what the developer does. And I'm wondering whether public authority, whoever that may be, shouldn't just counter that with their own desire. So Graham was talking about the gap between building developers saying, oh, I don't particularly want to share a party wall with my neighbour, but if we as the local community or the local authority were to come up with a master plan and say, look, here's a master plan, here's a building envelope within which we're going to build, that's what you can do on that plot of land, you know, whether you plan it in shingles or whether you plan it in granite is up to you. do, for example, the bridge in Berlin, they say, you know, the east line is this,
Yeah.
and the building envelope is that, you have to build up to the pavement, and within that envelope you can do pretty much what you like, so you're probably higher than that, you're probably lower than that. And I think the same happens in Barcelona as well.
They're rich cities where people are desperate to invest. You've got Dundee, where people are not quite so desperate to invest. Developers are more leverage.
Well, I think that may be the case, but in Berlin for many years, when it was cut off, nobody wanted to make the investment, they didn't know where the Russians were coming. So, you know, the development pressure wasn't particularly there, but still, they said, you know, we think it's in the common good that we stick to certain rules here, and, you know, the land lies empty for a while, lies empty for a while, but eventually, development pressure will build, and land was near the wall, did lie empty for many, many years, and now the development pressure is there, and they are implementing it, and it's looking good.
It's all too detailed for me, I'm afraid. I don't really have any comment to make about that. I mean, I think what we do like, I mean, without becoming a bore on this issue, if I was actually given the job, or if somebody like me was given the job, I think there are certain things that you can do once you're out in the field. You can actually start to negotiate, which the government can't on an individual basis. You don't expect to just go in there, you know, with a rucksack full of various tools and things that have been given to you by government. I think you can go in there and start. If the host local authority want to be party to this development, you can bring to it this group of people or these resources or whatever. Then there's a quid pro quo. You start to negotiate them with the host local authority. You start to negotiate them with potential builders long before you get a master plan and so on to see get the lay of the land. A government will find that level of detail at a very focused point extremely difficult to do. So, in a sense, I think the government, to make the first move, you're expecting too much of them. And I think we now actually need to start the deliberate process.
If I can come back on your general point without specifics or necessarily adapting examples, it's increasingly apparent that competitive cities are cities with a high place quality. It is well known from lots of experience, lots of studies, lots of literature, that the kind of places which are going to attract investment, where people are going to want to live, are high quality places. And it's interesting you Berlin in that context. Now, there is a problem when you start from a low base without a lot of investment, that the temptation is all the time to make that little compromise in order to get the investment today. And it's a hugely difficult balancing act. But there are places that have made so many compromises over the time. They might have got Tesco to put in a supermarket, but where are they going to be in sort of 20, 30 years' time? And it's not an easy thing at all. It's not an easy
Was it Tesco?
Exactly, that's the point I'm making. So, it's something that needs a great deal of thought as to how you do it. But if it's a city you realise the importance of place quality, the individual decision on where you hold the line is not just a decision on that particular development. It's what precedent does it set for the next time, the next time, the next time. That's the hard thing.
I have this discussion with a planning friend of mine about Sheffield, and every time I go to Sheffield, I think that's a demonstration how the planning system has completely failed, because there's no development, because the planner said, yeah, whatever you want to do.
Yes.
And now it's horribly higgledy-piggledy, and I think the development pressure actually goes down as a result of that, because everybody really wants to be there.
The other slide you showed, there was a slide where you had city centre process, that's not a good reason, but I wasn't quite sure why.
It depends on the context. I mean, what might be a scattergun approach, what might appear to be a scattergun approach in the centre of Dundee, might actually be a well-phased approach. Not entirely the same. If you had a major development at the edge of Dundee, a scattergun approach would be entirely inappropriate. What it's about is programming and planning the infrastructure and ensuring that if you're going to the theatre, you don't have to walk 300 yards to the nearest restaurant. It's interesting. I've heard an interesting discussion with Mike Galloway just under a year ago. He was talking about everything you have on the edge of Dundee, that is sort of the next expansion of the city, that is all bought up, swallowed up, optioned up by house builders, but they're not doing anything.
That's right, they're waiting for the cartel.
They're waiting
for demand.
They're waiting. And that is an example, in my view, where on that basis there will be much less added value in the long term. If that was sorted out by a place promoter, you would probably not simply get high quality, but you would get the homes coming on stream a lot earlier.
I mean, I shouldn't say public commercial operating a cartel. Or house builders, they sit and wait and make them out.
That could well be the case. I don't know too much enough about it.
Providing complementary products and not competition. Yes.
You're talking before about how the most successful cities are ones that have a strong sense of place to develop an identity. Is that not normally a function, correct me if I'm wrong, but is that not normally a function of there already being money in the city because of some kind of strong industry having developed, money coming in, because of that people moving in to be part of that industry, and then the money already being there, rather than coming about the other way and trying to think that the money will come if we create a quality place? And then how do you deal with that?
Should we?
You want to
Yeah.
Anybody?
Oh, I see anybody. It's yours, Dave.
I was going to say that there are varying ways, and it is much easier. There's a lot of money coming in London. It is much harder in somewhere like Newcastle, and yet if you go to Newcastle, it is a hugely different city than it was 20 years ago. If you go to Sage Gateshead, well, what was the chicken and the egg? It's Stuart. You've got an experience of this. I mean, sometimes you've got to start with very little and create a company.
Yes. You do.
So how do you start with somewhere like Newcastle, Sheffield, deindustrialized locations that people at that time are not falling over themselves and create those kind of attractions?
Well, I think with great difficulty, but I think, you don't know what the answers are. I mean, basically, I think you have to put a set of projects together that you hope you can get people to buy into as investors, and you just start there. I think the key thing about any redevelopment process, whether we're talking about micro level or the macro level, is momentum. You need to start. What happens most of the time in places that nothing's happening is that they are stuck in the mud, they're dead, because nothing is happening. It is extremely difficult to start to get something to happen in a place like in these kind of places. But until that wheel starts to move forward, then starts to attract resources to it. Once it starts to move, lots of people want to be part of that process once it's in forward motion. I don't really mind what it is that kick-starts it. It does need a kick-start. It needs a bang somewhere. And there needs to be a focus of attention right on getting something to move and focus to get that to happen. Once that happens, you try to build on it and keep that momentum going. That's what the development process is. getting the momentum going, and it will start to attract other resources to it. I mean, when Glasgow fell off the cliff, I suppose, really became deindustrialized, and a massive, the deindustrialization process of the United Kingdom happened in places like Glasgow. They have taken the big pain of that. Now, initially, literally, I guess we didn't realize we were standing on these kind of economic tectonic plates where we were actually moving from being a manufacturing economy to a service sector economy, and we talk now about a knowledge-based economy, but you don't realize it at the time. Well, of course, it's going to stop shortly, and manufacturing will come back, we'll reflate the British economy, America will help us out, and we'll get some American inward investment, because that's always happened since the war. So, you're looking for these, many people are in denial, waiting for real jobs, manufacturing jobs, making things, which Glasgow is associated with, to come back. And in that kind of circumstances, when companies were laying off 15,000 people here, seriously, 17,000 people, I mean, the figures are just terrible, mind-boggling in the 80s that happened in Glasgow. You just do what you have to, what you can. And what really happened, we were talking about this earlier, in a different sense, we cleaned up a lot of buildings. We buffed them all up, cleaned all the blackness off them, planted a lot of trees, painted a lot of bridges, threw up a lot of lighting, and then, serendipitously, I won't say that again, in 1983 there was a slogan that said, Glasgow's miles better, enigmatically, and it kind of caught, but it wouldn't have been able to say that had there not been a bit of a facelift in the city. Now, I don't think, you say, well, why would you do that? Because we couldn't do anything else. The idea of stopping hemorrhaging was beyond mere mortals. We were in a major economic transformation. We didn't realize it at the time. Now, I think that began to start to set the scene. I mean, I think the fight back began round about 1983, when you get this collision, this coincidence of the city looking better, Glasgow's miles better, a nicer place to be unemployed in. Some people were saying very unkindly, but it was the truth. And so you start, it's almost irrelevant what it is. You need to get civic pride back, a bit of civic spirit. And things need to start to move. Once the momentum, that's the key, this word momentum is the key. Once that's going, then don't let it falter. Keep it going, keep it going, keep it going, keep it going. Because that's what city economic development is. But getting that first win is extremely difficult.
Can I put that into another context for David then? There's clearly a huge momentum we picked up on it for good intentions and placemaking and policy processes that go with that, the urbanism, shreds, etc., etc. Do you think that, David looked at John, the planning person, and Ross was talking and saying, these are all great things, but he said, I don't really have levers to control it. So we go through this process, we get these fantastic master plans, and then I don't have the regulatory control that I need to really control it. Has it caught up, or is one thing being ahead of the other?
One of the most fundamental levers is control of land ownership. I think that we have made a huge error in terms of a number of years of sort of separating planning from land. Planning power and land ownership power. That doesn't mean a monolithic state ownership at all. But actually, if you want to achieve high quality urbanism, you want to do it more successfully through contracts of sale than you can through planning conditions. And there is a whole debate on through whose hands should land pass between its virgin state and its developed state, because that is often the key land ownership control and infrastructure investment, the higher quality of the place and the more remunerative is the development to both the public and the private purpose. Can I just say, in terms of the previous question, that I'm also part of the team looking at a very interesting area, immediately south of Nottingham city centre at the moment. We're doing various interviews, but this is an area that has been probably vacant for 20 years, 20, 25 years. It is a major, it is a major site. Anyone who knows Nottingham will know where it is. It's an area, it's the largest area just south of the city centre. And one of the things that I think has been a problem was hugely speculative, optimistic development proposals that were never going to come today in that location, that were put forward by private development interests in order to raise land values. Off they go, having got their planning permission. No way was that planning permission implementable in financial circumstances. But what that has done is it's stymied everything else. So one of the things one needs to do is to have a pretty realistic view of what will work and what will not work, because sort of expensive apartments and high quality office suites are not going to work in, should we say, across the whole of Glasgow. And sometimes I think more realistic views of what is possible is the key to achieving things. Again, I mean, Stuart, you must have experience of that, people putting forward schemes that never got built.
Unfortunately, the trouble is some of them did get built and they're still. Glasgow Harbour comes to mind. That was nothing to do with me. I mean, I was well away by then. But I mean, that's the kind of example I think we're talking about.
Actually, saying Nottingham like itself. Saying Nottingham like itself.
Sorry, I couldn't hear what you were saying. Just let the place calm down. I can hear what you're saying.
You say Nottingham was like itself by approving unrealistic proposals. And if they had been more realistic at the outset, they have a much more vibrant water south of the city centre than they do now. They've been seduced by being in China.
That there is a limit to which you can extend what we would call city centre uses beyond the city centre. And if you try and do that, Glasgow Harbour got built before the crash. Or large parts of it got built before the crash. This particular scheme, the planning permission, as I understand it, was given in after 4 or 5 years of negotiation on a major planning application, which is not untypical. The planning permission was given in late 2007 or 2008. So it never got built and never will get built. And probably was the wrong kind of scheme for that location, apart from at the height of the most lucrative development boom. In most cases, it would not be financially viable to build what was being proposed at that location, other than exceptionally. But what it then does is it colours perceptions for a generation of what people and styles look.
I think that's a great notion that you can kind of like yourself. Manchester did the same actually with the second phase of all that sort of you know, with museums and all that sort of thing. Then we've got a phase 2 plan for all that, just gone flat, nothing's happened. And I think since Manchester United performed particularly well, that's what happens in town. You know, they chronically overvalue the land and speculative development, which is never good.
I've got questions for you.
Yes.
I like the triangle and I have no problem with the its promoter. But don't you feel after the implementation stage, we need another proper substantial stage, which is to do with following up and feedback, follow up and feedback. We are very good sometimes in strategy and up to the delivery, but who will follow up, who will feedback, who will monitor the situation in the master plan, who will tell us what works, what hasn't worked, and what needs improving? Don't you think we kind of monitoring?
I mean, after a complete development.
That's what I mean, exactly. After the implementation stage, don't you think this is becoming required now? Because the developer, that's it, once he said the houses, the land, he has no interest at all to follow what's going on.
Yeah, that would send my model up in a different direction. I wasn't necessarily seeking to exclude it, but that is, and I don't disagree with what you're saying. It's sort of an added dimension, I think.
And a lot of things. I like the notion of ownership. And by the way, I'm writing papers on this one with reference to master planning. Do you think local authorities, after the delivery by the developer, local authorities can take the ownership of the process for the whole life of the project? Is there any mechanism, financially, socially, environmentally?
But I don't think the ownership of the whole life is actually crucial. I think there is a particular point at which is crucial to what happens, which is influencing the form, the nature, the quality of the development, the speed of the development, where ownership control is pretty crucial. I don't think there's any requirement thereafter. In fact, almost the opposite. You would hope that whenever an urban quarter whenever it comes into being, then whatever public investment is being put in, the rewards may be reaped in terms of land sales, land leases, and reinvested somewhere else. So I'm not for a moment suggesting a sort of old-style lease model where the local authority holds on to somewhere for 30, 40 years at all. And actually, that's how, if you think how the major investing institutions behave, increasingly, an investment institution will buy somewhere, will invest in it, bring it up to a certain standard, maybe keep it for a short period of time, and sell on. So the holding portfolios is probably now down to about 5 or 6 years at an average proportion. People don't necessarily hold, even the sort of kind of people who we would have thought would hold property for a long period of time, such as Standard Life or Aviva or someone like this, switch around their portfolios on a fairly regular basis these days.
We have one last question.
Is it a naive model to say if a planning planning of a city, planning part of a city designated an area of land, that area of land should pass to someone like SLDA, unit of ownership, be compulsory purchased prior to being sold on again? Could you create the kind of control you're talking about and legal control you're talking about without having massive land grabs by councils, but as if it passes through to create place-making controls, and the owner of land still gets good money for his land, but it isn't snapped up or bought preemptively by vested interests who don't have that same agenda for place-making.
It's very interesting. The best example from the study that is like that is the Fairfield Park one, where the local authority took no ownership stake in it at all. It was originally a redundant hospital in the southeast of England with a large acreage of the grounds, probably 50 or 60 acres. by the mental health part of the NHS. So it's an asylum years from the mid-19th century. So what the local authority did, and this was very careful, it set context that forced all the private interests to cooperate together in a consortium. And it did that through linking, not simply what you said previously, which is a red line on the map. It tied the planning approval through to a very clear design code. So the mechanism was a design code that the individual interests could only implement by working together rather than all working separately. Now, to do that, you need a local authority that is pretty well skilled up in terms